I'm grateful to the Minister for advance sight of his statement. Our starting position is that an agreed legal basis for Gibraltar's relationship with the EU is needed. Gibraltar deserves certainty about its future. Businesses in both Gibraltar and Britain need certainty. British citizens travelling to Gibraltar need certainty, and the many thousands of frontier workers need certainty. And we need to have proper scrutiny, not least because an acceptable deal between Gibraltar and the EU has to do many things at once. It must uphold unequivocally and without qualification British sovereignty over Gibraltar and the express will of the people of Gibraltar to be part of the British family, not Spain. Every government has a duty to defend the integrity of the United Kingdom and the British family wherever it exists. It must also deal with the practical realities of the frontier and Gibraltar's economy. However, we find ourselves in the extraordinary position that with the treaty signed and provisional application underway, and even with the final sections of the frontier fence now removed, Parliament has still not been afforded a proper debate in government time to scrutinise this agreement. Since the agreement was announced, the Shadow Foreign Affairs team have requested 5 urgent questions, numerous oral and written parliamentary questions to try to establish the government's intentions, often receiving unsatisfactory non-answers. The FCDO is responsible for Britain's treaty obligations, but it's been the government of Gibraltar, including the Chief Minister, who has all too often kept members of this House informed. I thank them for this. Even today, in this statement, there is no mention of the CRAG process and scrutiny, so I ask again for confirmation that the 21 sitting day CRAG process will apply, and will he set out the timetable for this today? We cannot have a repeat of the way the government has tried to avoid scrutiny, for example with the Chagos deal. On the substance of the deal itself, starting with the military base, can the Minister offer an unambiguous and unequivocal guarantee that nothing in this agreement constrains the operation, freedom of action or sovereign control of His Majesty's Armed Forces in Gibraltar? Britain's military base is not a matter for compromise, negotiation or shared competence. It is a sovereign British base, sovereign British territory serving vital British and NATO interests. On the entry of British commercial goods, including British foods, into Gibraltar, can the Minister confirm whether the new process has been stress-tested with British businesses, when will guidance for businesses be published? On movement of people, having a fluid border with Spain, a key request of the Gibraltar government, clearly comes with trade-offs, and we should recognise that. The decision to have Schengen checks in a British overseas territory is obviously one such compromise, and there is understandably a real strength of feeling about it, notwithstanding that Gibraltar has always had its own entry requirements, including for Brits. In light of reported chaos at the border, it's imperative that the government gets this right. And given the totally chaotic way that the EU has introduced its EES systems across Europe, it's imperative we do not see a similar situation at the Gibraltar airport. We on this side of the House will be watching. So what tabs is he keeping on the rollout of the new checks by the EU? And what is his recourse if British nationals end up being disrupted by EU issues? Turning specifically to Gibraltar's new residency regulations, which came into force on the 14th of July, what assessment has the Minister made of the impact on the ability of British citizens to live and work in Gibraltar? What is the anticipated impact on British citizens of retirement age wishing to relocate permanently to Gibraltar? And does the government have contingency plans to support Gibraltar if the Spanish government stages any provocations for their domestic audience now the border fence is down? And finally, the Leader of the Opposition in Gibraltar has expressed concern that the UK-Gibraltar Concordat envisages circumstances in which the UK could act without the consent of Gibraltar's government or people on treaty matters. What is the Minister's response to this? And if there were to be a change of government in Gibraltar, what implications would there be? To conclude, Gibraltar is as British as any of our constituencies. Britain and NATO rely on Gibraltar's strategically vital military base. In an age of insecurity, the base is indispensable for our country. Any deal to secure a long-term future arrangement between Gibraltar and the EU needs to be subject to the most rigorous scrutiny in this House. The government should know that and expect that members on this side of the House rightly desire to understand what this treaty means in practice. Thank you.
Minister Doughty.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And if I may, just apologise to the previous Madam Deputy Speaker. There was no substantive difference in my statement as delivered from the copy provided. I may have stylistically altered slightly a couple of lines, but I apologise for that in advance to you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Shadow Minister, for her very reasonable questions and indeed broad support for what we have signed and agreed. And I think recognising that this is supported by the people of Gibraltar, it is what they want, and actually there was unanimous support in the Gibraltarian Parliament for this deal, I think is very, very important. She asked about the CRAG process, as I explained in the debate that we had the other day, and I will reconfirm today, the treaty is now laid, the CRAG process starts. It will of course only take place while both houses are sitting, so the intervening period of the recess does not intervene with the ability of both houses to provide scrutiny, and actually it helpfully aligns with the process in the European Parliament. They have their own processes on this, which will take place in the autumn as well. I remain completely at her and other shadow ministers and the other shadow spokespeople's disposal for any further technical or other questions. I'm sure teams and officials will be also happy to provide further briefings. But I would gently say that we have answered many questions on this issue. We published a draft treaty text on 26th of February, so that's been in this House for 4 months for study. As I said, it hasn't substantively changed since then. I've appeared before multiple committees, and indeed we had a debate just in Westminster Hall the other day. I am very happy to talk about this. There is absolutely nothing to hide, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is an important treaty, and I'm glad, despite the comments about the process, that she broadly endorses it. She asked about military autonomy. I can tell her absolutely the military autonomy is protected. That was a key red line for us. And indeed, I think it also reflects a new relationship of cooperation. You know, Spain is a key NATO partner, and we're working alongside them on so many different issues. And I think it reflects a mature, responsible way forward. And actually, of course, as I said, does not affect in any way our operations from British Forces Gibraltar. She asked about goods and the processes. Indeed, of course, guidance is being provided to businesses. Of course, there are always some teething issues bringing in these processes, but we're actively monitoring what is happening in those processes and making sure that the systems can keep up. She asked about checks on people. I'm not sure what she meant by reported chaos. I think there were some slight issues with the first flight that came in, but the second flight has come in, I think, without incident. We're closely monitoring on the ground what is happening. Of course, with any new system, this is a dramatic change. There will be implementation issues, but she rightly raises important concerns about the entry-exit system. Of course, this deal was also to prevent that operating at the existing, now removed, hard border, which would have been very logistically complex. She knows the geography at the border. So I am confident these arrangements will work. We're keeping them under close monitoring. But in terms of the wider entry-exit system issues that she raises, myself and other ministers have been regularly raising these with other European counterparts and the Commission. She asked some specific points about pensions, which I'll happily write back to her on. I don't expect to see any provocations. I'm not sure what she was referring to in the future. I expect cooperation and cooperation in the mutual prosperity of the people of the whole region. I think that was very, very clearly reflected by the remarks that we had from the Spanish Prime Minister, and indeed from the Chief Minister of Gibraltar, and indeed the Mayor of Linares and officials from the Spanish side. Everybody wants this to work. Everybody wants this to work for people, for businesses, and I think we see a real new spirit and a way forward on this. She asked about the Concordat. I've signed the Concordat with the Chief Minister. I've also written to make some further clarifications. I hope those are satisfactory and address the concerns, but we're very, very clear. Nothing about Gibraltar without Gibraltar. Of course, we have some constitutional responsibilities, but I've set out that it's only in very exceptional circumstances there would be any difference in our position. We would always be working alongside Gibraltar, and I've set that out very clearly in the documents which she can read. With that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope she is satisfied, and I remain at her disposal for further detailed technical questions.